Donald Trump thought he could dominate a House Oversight Committee hearing by sheer force of personality. But he wasn't prepared for Jasmine Crockett to dismantle his testimony with a single, meticulously prepared question that left him visibly cornered. The moment the clip hit the internet, it exploded. C-SPAN had never moved so fast. Within an hour, hashtag Exhibit 4A was the #1 trend worldwide, surpassing a royal baby announcement and a blockbuster movie trailer combined. News anchors, who had been lazily predicting a day of political theater, were now scrambling, their voices laced with an adrenaline the story demanded. Legal analysts were pausing the footage, zooming in on Trump's face, a mask of fury and disbelief, and then, on Crockett's, a study in absolute calm. On every platform, the exchange was being cut, captioned, and remixed. The insult, "little girl," was plastered next to Crockett's unflinching gaze, creating a digital diptych of arrogance and poise. Deep in the bowels of the Rayburn House office building, staffers for the Republican members of the committee were already in damage control, trying to spin the narrative, but they were spitting into a hurricane. The story was already written, and it wasn't theirs. 2 days earlier, the world felt quieter, but no less focused inside Jasmine Crockett's D.C. office. The subpoena had been a political earthquake, a last resort measure by the committee after months of Donald Trump, the former president and current fruitrunner for the Republican nomination, was compelled to testify about Operation Sundown, a clandestine program that allegedly used federal resources to investigate and intimidate political donors who backed his opponents. The name itself was a leak, cynical and vaguely menacing, and it had stuck. For 48 hours, Crockett's world had shrunk to the dimensions of a single conference table buried under stacks of documents, financial transfers, encrypted emails, whistleblower affidavits, and redacted reports. Her chief of staff, a man named Marcus, who ran on coffee and quiet intensity, had been her gatekeeper, canceling everything that wasn't this. "They think it's a show," Marcus said, looking up from a heavily highlighted page. He wasn't asking a question. They think he'll come in, throw some insults, rally his base, and walk out a martyr. Jasmine didn't look up from the document she was reading, a dense timeline of shell corporation formations. "I know what they think," she said, her voice even. "That's his entire strategy. He'll play the victim. He'll call it a witch hunt. He'll perform for the cameras." She finally lifted her gaze, and her eyes were sharp. But performance doesn't hold up under oath. Not if you have the receipts. The decision to be the one to lead the questioning had been contentious within the Democratic caucus. Some wanted the committee chairman, a 70-year-old veteran of 100 such hearings, to take the lead. He was safe, respected, presidential. But others, a growing and vocal faction, argued that this moment needed a different kind of weapon. It needed a prosecutor. It needed someone who wouldn't be rattled by the insults, who wouldn't get drawn into a mud wrestling match. It needed someone who could cut through the noise with the clean, cold edge of the law. The vote had been close, but it had landed on her. The reason was simple. She wasn't afraid of him. More importantly, she respected the evidence more than she feared the man. Her phone buzzed. It was her mother from St. Louis, she answered, leaning back in her chair for the first time in what felt like hours. "Jasmine, he'll come. After you, I know, Mama. I'm ready." Ready is one thing, but you don't have to get down in the dirt with him. You just speak your piece and let the Lord handle the rest. Jasmine smiled, a genuine, tired smile. The Lord helps. Those who help themselves, Mama. And right now, he's helping me read through 1,200 pages of bank statements. I'll be fine, I promise. She hung up and looked at the whiteboard on the far wall. It was covered in a spiderweb of names, dates, and arrows, all connecting back to a single box in the center labeled DT. Her entire line of questioning was mapped out, a series of logical gates designed to close every escape route, but she knew he'd try to bolt. He always did. That's when the performance would start. And that's when she'd have to be ready, not with a better performance, but with something he couldn't fight. An undeniable fact. She picked up a single manila folder, separate from the rest of the pile. Inside was one document, a directive, authorizing a funds transfer. At the bottom was a signature, thick and jagged, scrawled with his trademark Sharpie. Exhibit 4, a her kill shot. She closed the folder. She wouldn't just question him, she would pin him. Meanwhile, 2,000 miles away. At his Mar-a-Lago estate, Donald Trump was overflowing with confidence. He stood in the middle of a gilded ballroom, surrounded by his inner circle of lawyers and political strategists. They were trying to prep him to run through potential questions, but he wasn't interested. He kept waving them off. A cheeseburger. In one hand, a Diet Coke on the marble table beside him. "This is a gift," he boomed, gesturing with the burger. "A total gift from the radical left. They're putting me on national television. Every network. The ratings will be tremendous. Better than The Apprentice." His lead lawyer, a man with a perpetually pained expression, tried to interject. "Mr. President, with respect, this is a legal proceeding. It's not a rally. They're going to try to trap you with details." Trump laughed, a loud, dismissive bark. "Trap me? They can't trap me. I'm the one who sets the traps. These people are stupid. They're weak." He took a large bite of his burger. "And who's this woman they have asking the questions?" "The new one, Crockett." He said the name like it was something unpleasant he'd stepped in. "Never heard of her? They're sending a nobody. She'll be so nervous she won't be able to speak. I'll make her cry." He turned to his social media director, a young man who looked like he hadn't slept in a week. "Get ready to clip it. Every time I hit them, I want it up on Truth Social in seconds. We'll sell t-shirts. Trump versus the swamp. It'll be beautiful." For him, the hearing wasn't a threat. It was an opportunity, a stage. He saw the room not as a chamber of government accountability, but as a television studio where he was the star. He had no intention of answering questions truthfully. His goal was to create moments, to generate outrage, to feed the narrative that he was a victim of a corrupt system. He wasn't preparing a defense. He was writing a script where he was the hero and the committee was the villain. He was sure of the ending. He was always sure. He couldn't fathom any other possibility. The idea that a little girl, a nobody, could outmaneuver him was not just unlikely. It was, in his mind, impossible. He finished his burger, wiped his hands on a napkin, and smiled. "Let's go make some television," he said the morning of the hearing. The air in the Rayburn building was electric with anticipation. A swarm of reporters, photographers, and camera crews clogged the hallways, a roaring river of noise and flashing lights. When Trump arrived, flanked by Secret Service, he reveled in it. He paused, waved, and pumped his fist, mouthing which, "Hunt to the cameras." He was playing his part perfectly, the defiant warrior striding into the enemy's den. He entered the committee room, and the room quieted, the clicking of cameras the only sound. He took his seat at the witness table, surveyed the dais where the members of Congress sat, and gave a small, contemptuous smirk. His gaze swept over them, dismissing each one until it landed on Jasmine Crockett. She was sitting perfectly still, a single folder on the desk in front of her. She wasn't looking at him. She was looking at the committee chairman, waiting. Trump leaned back in his chair, ready for the show to begin. The first hour was exactly what Trump had predicted and desired. The committee chairman began with a long, somber opening statement about the rule of law and the sanctity of the institution. Trump looked bored, rolling his eyes and sighing loudly for the cameras. Then, the ranking Republican member launched into a fiery tirade, accusing the Democrats of political persecution and staging a sham hearing. Trump nodded along, pointing at the Republican congressman and giving him a thumbs up. It was theater, predictable and pointless, and it was all going according to his plan. The initial questions from other Democratic members were easily. He deflected, he obfuscated, he attacked. "Congressman, that's a stupid question. And you know it's stupid. It's a fake question from the fake news. I don't recall. That was a long time ago. A lot of people were involved. Many people are saying it was someone else. This is all part of the Biden crime family's plan to steal the election. It's a disgrace. You should be ashamed." He wasn't answering anything, but he was dominating the room. His voice, amplified by the microphone, filled every corner. He was loud, he was aggressive, and he was setting the tone. The other members seemed to flail against his wall of bluster, their carefully phrased questions dissolving into the chaos he created. He was a black hole for accountability, sucking all order and reason into a vortex of grievance and accusation. He was winning. And then the chairman turned to Crockett. The chair now recognizes the gentlewoman from Texas, Ms. Crockett, for her line of questioning. The room seemed to hold its breath. This was the moment. Jasmine Crockett leaned forward, her voice calm and clear, a stark contrast to the shouting that had preceded it. "Good morning, Mr. Trump. I want to thank you for appearing before the committee today," Trump smirked. "I didn't have a choice. You sent men with guns to my house. It's a disgrace." Crockett didn't react to the lie. She simply continued. "I want to talk about the timeline of Operation Sundown. On April 12, 2024, a payment of $1.2 million was transferred from a political action committee, Americans for a Strong America, to a newly formed LLC called Patriot Research Group. Is that correct?" Trump waved a hand dismissively. "I don't know. I have many PACs. Many people donate to me because they love me and they love this country. I don't handle the day-to-day. I'm too busy fighting for America." "I understand," Crockett said. "So you have no knowledge of Patriot Research Group? Never heard of it? Another fake name made up by the Democrats." Crockett nodded slowly. "That's interesting, because on April 14th, just 2 days later, Patriot Research Group hired a private investigation firm. The firm's primary target, according to their own invoice, was a Mr. Robert Mercer, a prominent businessman and at the time, a major financial backer of your primary opponent. Were you aware of this investigation?" Trump's eyes narrowed. "Mercer I know, Bob. Good man. I wasn't investigating him. Why would I investigate him? He loves me." And yet, a week after the investigation began, Mr. Mercer publicly announced he was withdrawing his financial support for your opponent and would be staying neutral in the race. Do you believe that was just a coincidence, Mr. Trump? I think he's a smart man who realized he was backing a loser. People come to me. They always come to me. It's called winning. For 20 minutes, Crockett continued this way. She was methodical, relentless, and completely unbothered by his deflections. She laid out a latticework of dates, names, and financial transactions. She never raised her voice. She never showed emotion. She simply built her case, brick by brick, fact by fact. With each question, the net grew tighter. Trump's answers became more agitated. His confident bluster began to curdle into visible frustration. He was used to knocking his opponents off balance with insults. He was used to creating chaos. But Crockett refused to be knocked off balance. She refused the chaos. She just kept coming, her questions like a metronome, steady and persistent. "Mr. Trump, let's talk about the source of the funds. The $1.2 million that went to the Patriot Research Group. The committee has traced the origin of that money. It came from a blind trust, a trust of which you are the sole beneficiary. Can you explain why your personal trust would be funding investigations into your political rivals?" This was the first direct link, and Trump knew it. He leaned forward, his face turning red. "This is a lie. It's a witch hunt. You have no proof. You people are sick. You're destroying this country." He pointed a finger at her. "You're the one who should be investigated." Crockett remained still. "The proof is in the bank records. Mr. Trump, we have them. The transfers are undeniable." The room was silent. The Republicans on the committee shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The media was scribbling furiously. Crockett had him. She had laid the trap, and he had walked right into it. And he knew it. The bravado, the performance, it all fell away, replaced by pure, uncut rage. He glared at her, his eyes burning with a hatred that was both personal and profound. He saw not just a political opponent, but a woman, a black woman, who dared to question him, to methodically corner him in front of the world. And he did what he always did when he was cornered by a woman who wouldn't bend. He tried to break her. He leaned into his microphone, his voice dripping with condescension. "You know," he began, a sneer spreading across his face, "I've been very patient with you. Very, very patient. But you're getting a little out of control." He paused for effect, letting the threat hang in the air. "You should be more respectful, little girl." The insult landed with a thud. The room gasped. A few members on the Democratic side started to object, but the chairman waved them into silence. Trump wasn't finished. He gestured grandly at the ceiling. "I was president when you were probably learning to read. I ran the world. And you think you can come in here and question me? You're a nobody." He sat back, a triumphant smirk on his face. He thought he had one. He had changed the subject from the facts to her identity. He had belittled her, tried to shrink her down from a United States Congresswoman to a little girl. In his mind, he had put her back in her place. He expected her to get angry, to shout, to lose her composure. He expected her to become the emotional woman he was trying to paint her as. That's what he wanted. He wanted to make the story about her reaction, not his actions. He waited for the explosion, but it never came. Jasmine Crockett didn't flinch. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't even change her expression. She let his words hang in the silent room for a long moment, letting their ugliness and desperation sink in. Letting everyone in the room, and everyone watching at home, understand what he had just done. She allowed his mistake to be the centerpiece. Then she leaned into her microphone, her voice as calm and steady as it had been all morning. She looked directly at him. "Mr. Trump," she said, her tone cutting through his bluster like a scalpel, "my respect is for the rule of law." She paused, letting the words land. "Which brings me to Exhibit 4. As she reached down and opened the manila folder that had been sitting on her desk. She slid the single document out and held it up for the cameras to see before placing it on the document projector. On the massive screens behind the dais, a high-resolution image of the directive appeared. At the bottom, clear as day, was his unmistakable, jagged signature. "Mr. Trump, this is a document from the blind trust we were just discussing. It's a direct order to the trust's administrator. It reads, transfer $1.2 million to the Patriot Research Group for priority opposition research. It's dated April 10, 2024, 2 days before the transfer was made. A moment ago, you testified under oath that you had never heard of the Patriot Research Group." She pointed to the bottom of the screen. "Can you confirm for the committee that this is your signature on the order to fund the group you claim to know nothing about?" The world stopped. The camera zoomed in on Trump's face. The ruddy color drained away, leaving a pale, doughy mask of shock. His mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. His eyes darted from the screen to her, back to the screen. He was trapped. Utterly and completely trapped. There was no deflection, no insult, no lie that could get him out of this. It was his signature. It was his order. It was his lie exposed for the world to see, not by shouting or outrage, but by a quiet, methodical woman with a single piece of paper. The smirk was gone. The bravado was gone. All that was left was a cornered old man, stripped bare by the truth. The silence in the room was no longer just quiet. It was his political epitaph being written in real time. The former president's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. The silence stretched thick and heavy, punctuated only by the frantic clicking of 100 cameras capturing his public unraveling. His lawyers, seated behind him, were a study in controlled panic. One was shuffling papers with furious pointlessness, while the other, the lead attorney, leaned in to whisper urgently in Trump's ear. But Trump seemed not to hear him. His gaze was locked on Jasmine Crockett, and the look in his eyes was something beyond simple anger. It was the incandescent rage of a king who had just been checkmated by a pawn in front of his entire court. Finally, he found his voice. It was hoarse, stripped of its earlier booming confidence. "It's a fake," he croaked, the words barely audible. He cleared his throat and tried again, louder this time, desperately trying to recapture his bluster. "It's a forgery, a complete and total forgery. The radical left Democrats, they'll do anything. They probably made this in a basement somewhere. It's a disgrace." Crockett didn't respond to him. She addressed the chairman. "Mr. Chairman, the document in question, Exhibit 4A, was obtained via a lawful subpoena to the administrator of the trust. We have the certified chain of custody, which I am happy to enter into the record as Exhibit 4B. It is not a copy. It is a certified duplicate of the original admissible in any court of law in this country." She slid another, thicker folder onto the projector. The metadata from the original electronic file is included, showing it was created on a device registered to the Trump Organization and emailed from Mr. Trump's own server. The lead lawyer behind Trump stood up abruptly. "Objection, Mr. Chairman. This is an ambush. We have not had time to review these documents. This is a violation of my client's rights. This entire proceeding is a farce." The committee's ranking Republican, a congressman from Ohio named Jim Jordan, slammed his hand on the dais. "Point of order, Mr. Chairman. The gentlewoman from Texas is badgering the witness. She is presenting evidence that is clearly falsified, and she is not giving the witness adequate time to respond." The chairman, a man who had seen decades of such procedural warfare, banged his gavel once, the sound sharp and final. The gentleman will suspend. The witness will answer the question. This committee has followed all appropriate rules of discovery. The evidence was made available to the witness's counsel 72 hours ago, as per regulation. Mr. Trump, I will ask you again, and I will remind you that you are under oath. Is that your signature on Exhibit 4? The attempt to save him had failed. The trap wasn't just the document, it was the meticulous procedure Crockett and the committee staff had followed. They had anticipated the accusations of fakery and had the proof of authenticity ready to go. The chaos Trump's allies tried to create was neutralized by the calm, bureaucratic certainty of the law. All eyes turned back to Trump. He was now on his feet, his chair pushed back. The mask of a political candidate was gone, replaced by the raw fury of a cornered man. He was shouting now, his voice echoing in the vast hearing room. I will not be intimidated. I will not sit here and be lectured by a nobody from Texas who doesn't even know what she's talking about. This is a coup. This is treason. You are all traitors to this country. He pointed a shaking finger directly at Crockett. You are the one who should be in jail. You and your whole corrupt party. You are trying to steal an election from the American people, and I will not let you. He was spiraling, spewing his greatest hits of grievance and accusation. It was a verbal gish gallop, designed to overwhelm and confuse, to throw so much mud that no one could see the truth anymore. But Crockett just sat there, waiting patiently for the storm to pass. She did not interrupt. She did not object. She let him exhaust himself, his rage echoing into the silence that followed. She gave him all the rope he needed. When he finally stopped, breathing heavily, his face crimson, she leaned back into the microphone. Her voice was still quiet, a sliver of steel in the noisy room. Mr. Trump, you have not answered the question. My respect for the law and my respect for this committee requires me to ask it again. For the third and final time, and I remind you that lying to Congress is a felony offense, can you confirm for the committee that the signature on the order to fund the Patriot Research Group, the group you testified under oath that you had never heard of, is in fact yours? The repetition was devastating. It wasn't an attack. It was a cage, a simple yes or no question that he could not answer. If he said yes, he would be admitting to perjury right there in the hearing. If he said no, he would be committing perjury. About the signature itself, a signature that could be verified by a dozen handwriting experts before lunchtime, he had no moves left. His lawyer knew it. He was pulling at Trump's sleeve, whispering, "Plead the fifth. You have to plead the fifth." For Trump, that was the ultimate humiliation. Pleading the fifth was for mobsters, for criminals, for the guilty. It was an admission of defeat he was temperamentally incapable of making. He looked around the room, his eyes wild, searching for an escape. He saw the cameras, the reporters scribbling, the stony faces of the committee members. He saw Jasmine Crockett, her expression unreadable but her posture radiating a calm, unshakable confidence. He saw a scene of his own destruction. And so, he chose the only path he had left. He decided to burn the whole theater down. This hearing is over, he bellowed, ripping the microphone from its clip on his lapel and throwing it onto the table with a loud clatter. This is an illegal, unconstitutional sham. I will not participate in this witch hunt any longer. You have no power over me. He turned his back on the committee and began to walk away. The room erupted. Reporters were shouting questions. The chairman was banging his gavel repeatedly, his voice booming over the din. The witness is not excused. The witness is not excused. The witness is ordered to return to his seat. Sergeant at Arms, stop that man! But the Secret Service agents, their faces impassive, formed a protective wedge around Trump, parting the sea of chaos and escorting him toward the exit. He didn't look back. It was a retreat, disguised as an act of defiance. He was fleeing the scene of the crime, leaving a trail of legal and political wreckage in his wake. The Republican members of the committee seized the moment. "Mr. Chairman, this is what happens when you abuse your power," one yelled. Another was on his feet, pointing at the Democrats. "You did this. You pushed him too far. This is a stain on this institution." But Jasmine Crockett remained seated. As Trump reached the heavy wooden doors at the back of the room, she leaned into her microphone one last time. She didn't shout. She didn't have to. Her voice, amplified, electronically cut through the noise and followed him out the door. "Let the record show," she said, her voice ringing with clarity, "that in the face of a direct question about Exhibit 4A, under oath, the former President of the United States refused to answer and fled the room." The doors swung shut behind him. The sound echoed like a gunshot. The room was still a mess of shouting and gaveling, but in that one sentence, Crockett had defined the moment for history. He hadn't won. He had run. He hadn't been defiant. He had been defeated, and a little girl with a binder full of facts had done it. She calmly closed the folder for Exhibit 4A, her work for the day complete. The fallout was just beginning. Chaos of the hearing room spilled out into the hallway, which had transformed into a compressed, screaming mass of humanity. As Crockett emerged, guided by 2 Capitol police officers, she was hit by a wall of noise. Reporters lunged forward, shouting her name, thrusting microphones and phones toward her face. "Congresswoman, what's your reaction? Did you expect him to walk out? Have you triggered a constitutional crisis? Crockett over here? Are you calling for his immediate prosecution?" She kept her head down, her expression neutral, and continued to walk. She had said everything she needed to say in the hearing room, under the protection of congressional rules. The hallway was a different kind of battlefield, one of spin and sound bites, and she had no intention of fighting there. As she was funneled toward a private staircase, she caught a glimpse of a TV monitor mounted on the wall. It was showing a live shot of the White House. The anchor's voice was grave. "We are getting reports that the Department of Justice has called an emergency press conference for 2 p.m. this afternoon. Again, the former president has just walked out of a congressional hearing after being confronted with evidence that he may have committed perjury." Her aide Mark S. was waiting for her in the stairwell, his face pale but his eyes alight. He held her briefcase and a bottle of water. "Every news outlet on the planet is calling," he said, his voice a half-whisper. "The chairman's office says your questioning was a masterclass in prosecutorial precision. The ranking member's office is already drafting a motion to censure you for unbecoming conduct." He managed a thin smile. "So, you know, a typical Tuesday." Jasmine took the water and drank deeply. She felt a profound exhaustion begin to settle into her bones, the inevitable crash after an adrenaline surge that had lasted for 48 hours. "They can try to censure me," she said, her voice quiet. "It doesn't change what's on that paper." They descended the stairs and headed for the underground tunnels that connected the House office buildings. A way to escape the media swarm above, the concrete hallways were cool and quiet, a stark contrast to the pandemonium they had just left. Her phone, which Marcus had been holding, had been buzzing nonstop. He handed it to her. The screen was a cascade of notifications, hundreds of text messages, thousands of emails. A flood of social media tags. She swiped through the lock screen and saw the top messages. One was from the House Minority Leader. "Incredible work. You made the institution proud." Another was, from a fellow Texas Democrat, "My phone is blowing up with calls from back home. They're calling you the Lioness of Lone Star." But then she saw the other messages, the ones from blocked numbers, the ones that filtered into the requests folder on her social media. They were vile, filled with racist and sexist slurs, threats against her and her family, photos of her house taken from the street, an image of a noose, a detailed description of what the sender wanted to do to her. The language was brutal, graphic, and filled with the same unhinged rage Trump had displayed in the hearing room. Now echoed by his followers, she stopped walking and leaned against the cold concrete wall, the phone heavy in her hand. The victory of the moment suddenly felt hollow, replaced by the sickening, familiar weight of the cost. The private cost. The victory was public, a shared moment of accountability that millions could cheer for. The cost was private, a poison she was expected to metabolize in silence. Marcus saw her face change. "Jasmine, are you okay?" She took a slow breath and straightened up, putting the phone back in her purse. "I'm fine," she said, her voice betraying a slight tremor she hoped he wouldn't notice. "It's just the usual background noise." He knew what it was. He didn't press. "Your mom called twice. I told her you were safe, and you'd call her back as soon as you could." "Okay," she said, starting to walk again. "Let's get back to the office. We have a lot of work to do." Back in her office, the phones were ringing off the hook. 2 junior staffers were trying to manage the deluge, their faces a mixture of excitement and stress. CNN, MSNBC, and Fox News are all holding for you on different lines, one said. The Washington Post and the New York Times want to schedule interviews for their front-page stories tomorrow. Jasmine walked past them into her private office and closed the door. The sound was immediately muffled. She sank into the chair behind her desk, the silence a welcome relief. She ignored the blinking lights on her phone and instead dialed her mother. She answered on the first ring. "Jasmine, oh, thank the Lord I saw it. I saw the whole thing. Are you all right? He was so ugly to you." Jasmine closed her eyes, letting her mother's worried voice wash over her. "I'm fine, Mama. I'm okay. Don't you worry about me. How can I not worry? He called you a little girl in front of the whole world." I wanted to reach through that television and slap the taste right out of his mouth. Jasmine laughed, a short, sharp sound. "I know you did, but you taught me better than that. You taught me to fight with my head, not my hands." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "I did," her mother said, her voice thick with emotion. "And you did. Oh, baby, you did. When you pulled out that paper, I have never been so proud in my whole life. You stood there, and you didn't let him shout you down. You just stood on the truth. Your father, God rest his soul, he would be bursting with pride right now." Tears pricked at the back of Jasmine's eyes, and she fought them back. This was the part no one else saw. The quick, private moment to connect with the source of her strength, to be reminded of why she was doing this. It wasn't just for the law or the institution. It was for the people who had raised her, for the community that believed in her, for the little girls watching at home who needed to see that you didn't have to shout to be strong. "I love you, Mama," she whispered. "I love you too, baby. Now, you get some rest. It looks like you've got a long fight ahead of you." She hung up the phone and took a deep breath. Her mother was right. The fight was far from over. In fact, it had just entered a new, more dangerous phase. A notification popped up on her computer screen. It was a news alert from a major press organization. The headline read, "Trump, in defiant rally, accuses Crockett of treason, calls for her arrest." He hadn't gone home to lick his wounds. He had gone straight to a microphone. He was doubling down, turning the full force of his political machine on her. The threats would get worse. The pressure would intensify. The entire right-wing media ecosystem would now be dedicated to her destruction. She was no longer just a congresswoman. She was the enemy. She didn't click the link. She didn't need to. She could already hear his voice in her head, feel the venomous energy of the crowd. Trump's political strategy wasn't a set of policies. It was a feedback loop of outrage. He would absorb a blow, magnify the perceived injustice, and reflect it back onto his supporters, who would then amplify it into a tidal wave of fury. She was no longer just the person who had exposed his lie. She was now the symbol of the entire deep state conspiracy he had railed against for years. She was the face on the dartboard. The cable news channels were a dizzying kaleidoscope of her face next to his. On one network, a panel of legal experts was lauding her performance. What we witnessed today was not political theater. A former federal prosecutor was saying, his face grim with admiration. It was a surgical dissection of a lie. Congresswoman Crockett used the facts as her scalpel, and the former president's credibility bled out on the floor of that hearing room. On another channel, the Chiron blared a partisan assassination. The host, a blonde woman with a perpetually angry expression, was practically shouting. Jasmine Crockett, a radical leftist nobody, didn't go in there seeking truth. She went in there for a scalp. She abused her power, disrespected a former president of the United States, and her actions have pushed this nation to the brink. She is a danger to our democracy. It was a perfect split screen of a nation at war with its own reality. You could choose which version of events you preferred, which narrative suited your political identity. But only one side had Exhibit 4A Marcus knocked and entered without waiting for a response, his face grim. The rally just ended. "We have the transcript." He placed the papers on her desk. Jasmine didn't want to read it, but she knew she had to. She had to know exactly what kind of fire was being aimed at her. His words were even worse than she'd imagined. He had taken the little girl comment and twisted it into a badge of honor. They sent this woman, this nasty, nasty woman, Crockett, after me. Trump had roared to a cheering crowd of thousands, and she was vicious and angry, and I called her out. I said, "Be respectful." But they don't know respect. They want to destroy our country. And I'm telling you, what she did today, it's treason. It's a crime. She should be investigated. She should be arrested. Lock her up. The crowd had chanted it back. The sound, thunderous, even on the page. Lock her up, lock her up, lock her up. It was the same chant he had used against his female opponent years ago, a tool of casual misogyny now repurposed and aimed directly at her. He had given them a name, a face, and a command. The professional cost was one thing's censure motions, attacks from colleagues. The personal cost was now escalating into something far more sinister. The next morning, 2 plainclothes Capitol police officers were waiting for her outside her apartment. One was a tall, stoic man named Agent Miller. The other, a sharp-eyed woman named Agent Chen. Congresswoman Miller said, his voice polite but firm, "We've been assigned as your protective detail until further notice. There's been a significant increase in online threats that the department deems credible." Jasmine looked at them, at their holsters discreetly hidden under their blazers, at the black SUV parked at the curb. It felt like a surrender. To do her job, to hold a powerful man accountable, she now had to live in a bubble, escorted from her home to her office like a prisoner. "It's because of the rally, isn't it?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. "The rhetoric has elevated the threat level." "Yes, ma'am," Chen replied. "We'll be with you at all times in public. We've also done a security sweep of your office and your residence." As they drove through the D.C. streets, the city looked the same, but her relationship to it had fundamentally changed. She was no longer just a participant in its daily life. She was a target moving through it. Every person who glanced at the car, every truck that pulled up alongside them, was now a potential threat to be assessed. This was the price of speaking truth to power. Power, when cornered, didn't just argue back. It tried to silence you permanently. The conflict wasn't just external. It was brewing within her own party. Later that day, she was summoned to the office of the House Minority Leader. He was a shrewd political operator in his late 60s, a man who believed in incremental progress and avoiding unforced errors. He greeted her with a handshake, but his smile didn't reach his eyes. "Jasmine, that was a hell of a moment yesterday." He began, gesturing for her to sit. "You landed a punch that no one else could have." "Thank you," she said, waiting for the but. "But," he continued, steepling his fingers, "the blowback is immense. Trump is already fundraising off it. He's claiming martyrdom, and his base is eating it up. Polling in swing districts shows some independents are uncomfortable with the spectacle. They see it as more D.C. infighting, not the righteous accountability we see it as." "He lied under oath," Jasmine said, her voice steely. "The facts are the facts. We can't let our strategy be dictated by whether or not it makes some people uncomfortable. The truth is often uncomfortable." "I don't disagree," the leader said, leaning forward. "But politics is the art of the possible. You poked the bear in the eye with a very sharp stick. Now the bear is enraged, and it's tearing up the whole forest. My concern is that this focus on Trump, this spectacle, will overshadow our legislative agenda. We have an infrastructure bill to protect voting rights to pass. We can't let his drama become the only thing anyone is talking about for the next 6 months. He wants that. He thrives in that chaos." She understood what he was saying. He was worried she had created a martyr, that her clean legal victory would be buried under a political avalanche of her own making. He was asking her to quiet down, to let the moment pass, to recede into the background so the party could get back to what he considered its real work. "With all due respect, sir," Jasmine said, standing up, "holding a lawless president accountable is our real work. Protecting the rule of law is our legislative agenda. If we sacrifice that for the sake of political expediency, then what are we even doing here?" She left his office feeling a profound sense of isolation. She had faced down Trump. She was facing down the death threats. Now she had to face down the timidness of her own allies, the ones who were more afraid of a difficult news cycle than they were of creeping authoritarianism. The next day, the fight moved back to the Oversight Committee. As Marcus had predicted, the Republicans moved immediately to censure her. The ranking member read a prepared statement, his voice dripping with faux solemnity. Congresswoman Crockett's conduct during yesterday's hearing was a disgrace to this body, he intoned. She ambushed a witness with unverified documents, she badgered and insulted a former president, and she conducted herself not as a legislator, but as a partisan attack dog. Her actions were unbecoming of a member of Congress, and she must be held accountable. As he spoke, Jasmine sat silently, refusing to give them the satisfaction of a reaction. When he finished, several of her Democratic colleagues demanded to be heard. One by one, they rose to her defense. An older congressman from California, a constitutional law professor before entering politics, took the floor. "I am frankly stunned by the motion before us," he said, adjusting his glasses. "The gentleman from Ohio accuses my colleague of using unverified documents, yet the transcript clearly shows that Congresswoman Crockett had the certified chain of custody for Exhibit 4A ready to be entered into evidence. He accuses her of badgering, yet the transcript shows she asked the same simple question 3 times, a question the witness refused to answer only after he subjected her to a misogynistic and demeaning personal insult." He looked directly at the Republican side of the dais. "And you accuse her of being a partisan attack dog." She was armed not with partisanship, but with facts. Facts that the witness, Mr. Trump, could not refute. He was not a victim of her conduct. He was a casualty of his own dishonesty. If we censure any member today, it should be the members who are more outraged by a congresswoman's pointed questions than they are by a president's blatant perjury. I yield back. The debate raged for over an hour. The Republicans repeated their accusations, and the Democrats countered with the facts from the transcript. It was a proxy war for the battle happening all over the country, a war between a narrative of grievance and the cold. In the end, the censure motion failed on a party line vote. It was a small victory, but it was an important one. It was a sign that the institution, however battered, could still, on occasion, hold. That night, Jasmine stayed late in her office, long after her staff and her security detail had gone home for the day. The 2 officers were stationed outside her door, a constant, grim reminder of the world outside. She had told them she needed to work, but really, she needed to think. She opened her laptop and, for the first time, began to read the messages. She bypassed the major news outlets and the political blogs. She went straight to her email, to the public inbox that was normally filled with casework requests and automated newsletters. It was flooded, thousands upon thousands of messages. She ignored the hateful ones, the ones with subject lines like, "Traitor, and you will pay." She scrolled past them and began to open the others. They were from every corner of the country. An email from a high school civics teacher in rural Oregon. "Dear Congresswoman Crockett, I showed the clip of your questioning in all 5 of my classes. Today, I wanted my students, especially the young women, to see what integrity looks like under pressure. You didn't shout, you didn't grandstand, you just used the truth as your shield and your sword. Thank you for that lesson." A message from a corporate lawyer in Chicago. "As a black woman who has spent 30 years in boardrooms being called aggressive when I'm being assertive and emotional when I'm being passionate, I wept when I watched you yesterday. The moment he called you little girl, I felt a lifetime of slights and condescension. And when you responded not with anger, but with Exhibit 4A, you responded for all of us. You didn't just win a legal point. You won a battle for our dignity." A handwritten letter, scanned and emailed by a grandchild, from an 80-year-old retired farmer in Iowa. "Ma'am, I did not vote for your party. I probably never will. But I was raised to believe that a man's word is his bond, and the truth matters. I saw a man lie, and I saw a woman stand up and prove it. Respect, that's all I can say, just respect." She read for hours, message after message. A river of support from ordinary people who had seen through the political noise and understood the fundamental principle she had been fighting for. These people weren't uncomfortable with the spectacle. They were thirsty for the accountability. They were the forest the minority leader couldn't see because he was so focused on the enraged bear. They were the reason she had to keep fighting. No matter the cost, she was just about to close her laptop. A sense of renewed purpose settling over her when an urgent email from Marcus popped up. The subject line was in all caps, "You need to see this now." She clicked it open. It was a link to a well-known, highly influential conservative news site, one that was usually a reliable bastion of pro-Trump commentary. But this wasn't a news story, it was an op-ed published just minutes ago. The author was Judge Harrison Thorne, a retired federal judge appointed by Ronald Reagan. Thorne was a legend in conservative legal circles, a fierce originalist, and a man whose intellectual integrity was considered unimpeachable, even by his ideological opponents. He had been critical of Trump's character in the past, but had always defended him on policy and legal grounds, arguing that the deep state was indeed working against him. But the title of this op-ed was not what she expected. It read, "On Procedure and Patriotism, Why Congresswoman Crockett Was Right." Jasmine's breath caught in her throat. She began to read. "For years, I have warned against the weaponization of our legal and political institutions for partisan ends." Thorne's op-ed began, "I believe the former president has been, at times, the unfair target of such weaponization. What I witnessed 2 days ago in the House Oversight Committee, however, was not that. What I witnessed was the precise, powerful, and procedurally flawless application of congressional oversight. It was a textbook example of our system of checks and balances working exactly as the founders intended." She scanned down the page, her heart pounding. The insults directed at the Congresswoman were a disgrace, a desperate attempt to distract from the substance of the inquiry. But her response was the triumph. She did not take the bait. She did not descend to his level. She responded not with rhetoric, but with a fact encapsulated in a single verified document. In that moment, Congresswoman Crockett was not acting as a Democrat or a partisan. She was acting as an officer of the Constitution, defending the principle that no man, not even a former president, is above the truth. Her patriotism was on fuller display in that quiet, devastating question than in all the flag-waving and bluster of the man she was questioning. Conservatives who are attacking her for doing her constitutional duty are making a grave mistake. They are sacrificing their principles for the sake of a personality, and in doing so, they are validating the very swamp they claim to despise. Jasmine sat back, stunned. This was not just an unexpected ally. This was a tactical nuclear weapon. Deployed in the middle of the raging political war, a voice of unimpeachable conservative authority had just publicly and unequivocally sided with her. He had reframed the entire debate. It was no longer just Democrats versus Trump. It was now the Constitution versus chaos. And he had just told his entire side that she was the one defending the Constitution. The ground had just fundamentally shifted beneath her feet. The silence in Jasmine Crockett's office was absolute. She and Marcus just stared at the screen, reading and rereading Judge Thorne's words. It felt like a hallucination. In a war that had been defined by rigid, unbreachable trench lines, a revered general from the opposing army had just walked across no man's land, planted a flag for the rule of law, and saluted her. Marcus was the first to speak, his voice a stunned whisper. "My God, do you know what this does? This changes the entire conversation. They can't call you a partisan hack when Harrison Thorne is calling you a patriot. They can't say it was an ambush when he calls it procedurally flawless. He just took away all their talking points. All of them." Jasmine stood up and walked to the window. Looking out at the lights of Washington, D.C., the city suddenly felt different. The weight of the threats, the isolation, the political pressure, it hadn't vanished. But it felt ... lighter. "Alone anymore. He gave us cover," she said, more to herself than to Marcus. "He gave every moderate Republican and every wavering independent permission to agree with the facts without feeling like they're betraying their side." The proof came almost instantly. Marcus turned up the volume on the small TV in the corner of the office. The same Republican congressman who had called for her censure just a day before was now on a primetime news show, squirming under the lights. "Congressman?" the anchor said, her expression serious. "Judge Harrison Thorne, a man your party holds in the highest esteem, wrote today that Congresswoman Crockett was not being partisan, but was, in his words, acting as an officer of the Constitution. How do you respond to that?" The congressman blinked, completely wrong-footed. "Well, Judge Thorne is a brilliant legal mind, of course, but he wasn't in that room. He didn't see the vitriol, the personal nature of the attacks from the gentlewoman from Texas. But his op-ed wasn't about the tone," Congressman the anchor pressed. It was about the procedure and the facts. He said the facts were undeniable and the procedure was flawless. Do you disagree with his assessment of the law? The congressman stammered, launched into a word salad about the weaponization of government, and tried to pivot back to his familiar attacks, but the damage was done. He sounded weak and evasive. The narrative shield he and his colleagues had been hiding behind had been shattered. Judge Thorne's words had become the new center of gravity for the entire story. The reaction from Mar-a-Lago was apoplectic. Trump posted a furious message on his social media platform just after midnight. The Reno judge Harrison Thorne is a disgrace to the conservative movement. He's always been jealous of our success. A washed-up old man who wants to be relevant, again by siding with the radical left mob. Sad, he's a traitor to MAGA, and he will be treated as such. The attack was telling. It was frantic, personal, and, for the first time, defensive. He was no longer the confident general rallying his troops against a lone enemy. He was now fighting a civil war within his own ideological camp, forced to attack a conservative icon. He had lost control of the narrative, and he knew it. The next morning, the political landscape had been completely reshaped. The minority leader, who had warned Jasmine about poking the bear, was now on a morning show. The calls flooding her office were no longer just from news producers. They were from major party donors, from grassroots organizations, from influential figures who now saw her not as a risk, but as the party's most valuable asset. Marcus came into her office with a whiteboard and a stack of offers. "Okay," he said, the exhaustion gone from his face, replaced by a feverish energy. "The iron is white-hot. We have requests from every primetime anchor. A special town hall event. The Sunday morning shows are begging. The consensus is you should do a major one-on-one interview. Sit down, tell your story, and cement this victory in the public mind. It's a layup. It was the logical move. It was what any politician would do. Seize the momentum, take the victory lap, and solidify the win." Jasmine looked at the board, at the names of the famous journalists and the powerful networks. She thought about sitting in a sterile TV studio, under hot lights, answering questions designed to create more conflict, more drama. It would be her face versus Trump's face on the screen again. It would become another episode in the endless political soap opera. "No," she said quietly. Marcus stopped writing. "No. What do you mean, no, Jasmine? This is our moment. This is the moment." "That's exactly why," she said, turning to face him. "This moment is bigger than me. It's bigger than him. The second I sit down on one of those shows, it becomes about me again. It becomes about my personality, my tone, my political ambitions. They'll ask me if I'm running for president. They'll try to create a feud. It'll be performance. We can't let what Judge Thorne did, what all those people who wrote me emails did, be reduced to a soundbite about political celebrity." Marcus looked at her, his brow furrowed. "So what do? We can't just stay silent. We're not going to be silent," Jasmine said, a new clarity forming in her mind. "We're going to speak, but we're going to do it on our terms. In our own space." She thought back to the messages she had read, the ones from the students, the lawyers, the everyday people. That was her audience. That was who this was for. "Get me the dean of Howard University Law School," she said. "Tell him I'd like to come and speak to the students about the Constitution. No big press conference, no panel, just a speech. We'll put one camera in the back of the room and put the whole thing online ourselves." Marcus stared at her for a full 10 seconds, then a slow grin spread across his face. He understood. It wasn't a retreat from the fight. It was an elevation of it. It was a refusal to play by the media's rules. It was a move so unexpected, so counterintuitive to the normal rhythms of Washington, that it was brilliant. "Yes, ma'am," he said, already reaching for his phone. "I'll get it done." A week later, Jasmine stood at a simple wooden lectern, an auditorium at Howard University. The room was packed with law students, their faces bright with anticipation. There were no clique lights, no shouting reporters, just the quiet hum of a room full of people who had come to listen. Her security detail, Miller and Chen, stood discreetly at the back, their presence a quiet reminder of the stakes. She wore a simple blue dress, and she carried no notes. She looked out at the sea of young, predominantly black faces, and she Felt at home, she began to speak, her voice calm and measured, carrying easily through the hall. "Good afternoon. It's an honor to be here. A lot has happened in the past couple of weeks. There's been a lot of noise, a lot of shouting, a lot of analysis about who won and who lost. But I didn't come here today to talk about winning. I came to talk about the law." She paused, letting her words settle. We're taught that the law is a shield. It's meant to be a set of rules that protects everyone equally, regardless of their wealth or their power. It's the promise that in a courtroom or in a hearing room, the facts matter more than the title in front of your name. But that promise is fragile. It requires constant defense. It requires people who are willing to stand up and insist that the rules apply to everyone, especially to those who believe the rules are only for other people. A few weeks ago, I was in a room where that promise was being tested, and I was asked a question, not with words, but with actions. Would I allow the force of a powerful personality to silence the force of a simple fact? The man I was questioning tried to make the conversation about me. He used a tactic that is familiar to many of you, especially the women in this room. It's the tactic of dismissal. When you can't refute a woman's argument, you attack her character. You question her tone. You belittle her intelligence. You call her nasty or emotional, or, in this case, little girl. A murmur of recognition went through the crowd. That insult, she continued, was not personal. It was strategic. It was designed to shrink me, to make me small, to turn me into a caricature so that no one would have to listen to the substance of my words. It's a tactic used in boardrooms, in classrooms, in courtrooms, and in hearing rooms every single day. And it is designed to do one thing: to make you quiet, to make you doubt yourself, to make you sit down and shut up. I chose not to, not because I am special, but because I believe in the principle that our voices are not conditional. Right to speak, your right to be heard, your right to bring the truth into a room does not depend on the comfort of the people in that room. It is your right, period. The other side of this is the idea of patriotism. We are told that patriotism is about loud declarations, about waving the biggest flag, about shouting your love for your country from the rooftops. I don't believe that. I believe true patriotism is often quiet. It's the difficult, unglamorous, day-in, day-out work of upholding your oath. It's the work of reading the 1,200 pages of bank statements. It's the work of respecting procedure. It's the work of insisting on the boring, tedious, and beautiful supremacy of the law. It's about defending the integrity of the house, not just throwing a party in the living room. She leaned forward slightly, her voice dropping the entire room into a shared confidence. There is a narrative being pushed right now that is designed to confuse you. It's a classic magician's trick. They want you to believe the house is on fire, so you'll forgive them for stealing the furniture. They create chaos. They scream about witch hunts and conspiracies. They set fires in every corner of the public square, hoping that you'll be too distracted and too scared to notice the quiet, methodical theft of your rights, your institutions, and your democracy. I am here to tell you, the house is not on fire. It's being robbed in broad daylight. Do not watch the flames, watch their hands. The room was utterly still for a beat, and then it erupted. The students were on their feet, the applause not just loud, but visceral, a release of pent-up frustration and a surge of inspiration. Jasmine simply nodded, a small, grateful smile on her face. She had done what she had come to do. She had defined the principle. She had armed them, not with anger, but with clarity. The speech, filmed by a single camera and uploaded to YouTube without commentary, did what no network interview could have. It cut through the noise. Within 24 hours, it had more views than any of the cable news clips from the hearing. The line, "The house is not on fire, it's being robbed in broad daylight," became the defining quote of the moment. It was shared by teachers, CEOs, activists, and even, quietly, by a few Republican officials who were tired of the chaos. It was a sentence that framed the stakes perfectly. Far away on a private jet cutting through the night sky, Donald Trump was watching the clip on a large screen mounted to the wall of his cabin. Aides stood by, silent and nervous. He watched the whole speech, his face an unreadable mask, but his knuckles were white where he gripped the armrest of his leather chair. He watched the students rise to their feet, their applause echoing tinny and small from the speakers. He saw the look of calm, unshakable conviction on Jasmine Crockett's face. He had thrown his best insults at her, He had sixed his mob on her. He had tried to shrink her, and in response, she hadn't just survived, she had created a new language of opposition, one that was clear, powerful, and resonating far beyond the political bubble. He finally looked away from the screen and turned to his lead strategist. The resentful rage was still there, but it was now mixed with something else, a cold, clear understanding that this was a different kind of enemy. She wasn't playing his game. She was playing a long game, one he didn't fully understand but knew was dangerous. "Find everything you can on her," he said, his voice low and menacing. "Her family, her finances, her friends, her kindergarten teacher. I don't care what it is. I don't care if you have to make it up. We are not losing to her. Bury her." The order was given in the sterile quiet of a private jet, but its execution was loud and messy. Within days, the digital sewers began to overflow. It started on fringe websites and anonymous forums, then was laundered through a network of blogs and social media influencers. The attacks were personal, crude, and relentless. A photograph of Jasmine at her sister's wedding was digitally altered to place a cocktail in her hand, with a caption insinuating she was a drunk. A routine mortgage application from a decade ago was leaked, with highlighted lines twisted to suggest financial impropriety. They dug up old cases from her time as a public defender, posting mugshots of her former client Saul, of them black or brown with captions, designed to paint her as a friend to criminals and an enemy of law and order. The most vicious attacks were aimed at her family. They found her mother's voter registration, her brother's small business address, and posted them online. A doctored audio clip surfaced, a distorted voice meant to sound like her father, who had been dead for 10 years, making racist remarks. It was a ghoulish, baseless smear, but it was broadcast on a popular right-wing podcast anyway. The goal wasn't to be believable to the mainstream. It was to be vile enough to energize the base and to inflict the maximum amount of personal pain. Jasmine felt this assault in a way that was different from the political attacks. The censure motion was theater. The death threats, while terrifying, were in a strange way abstract. But this was an invasion. It was an attempt to poison her memories, to defile the names of the people she loved, to turn her private life into a public weapon to be used against her. She was in her D.C. apartment, the curtains drawn, when she made the call to her mother. Her security detail, Agents Miller and Chen, were posted in the hall, but the apartment felt like a bunker. "Mama," she started, her voice tight. "I'm so sorry." "Jasmine, what on earth do you have to be sorry for?" her mother replied, her voice firm, though Jasmine could hear the strain beneath it. "I saw that filth they're putting online about your father. Let them talk. God will sort them out. Anyone who knew that man knows what a good, decent Christian he was. Their lies can't touch our truth, but they're putting your address. Online, they're harassing David's business. This is my fault. I brought this into our lives." "Hush now," her mother said, her tone softening. "You did not bring this. They did. Bullies and liars bring this. You brought the truth. You stood up in that room because you believed in what was right. Your father would have been the first one to tell you that when you fight for what's right, the devil is going to fight back twice as hard. You just pray, you stand firm, and you do not let them see you fall. Do you hear me, Jasmine? You do not let them win by breaking your spirit." Jasmine closed her eyes, a single tear tracing a path down her cheek. "I hear you, Mama." Her team was in full crisis mode. Marcus had set up a war room in their main office, trying to play a desperate game of whack-a-mole. For every lie they debunked with a press release, 2 more would spring up. Mainstream journalists would call, asking for comment on the latest smear. And the very act of asking the question gave the lie a legitimacy it didn't deserve. "It's a classic smear campaign," Marcus said, pacing the office, his hair disheveled. "They're not trying to convince people. They're trying to create exhaustion. They want to flood the zone with so much garbage that ordinary people just tune out, assuming that both sides are just as bad. It's how he wins. Everyone down into the mud with him because that's the only place he knows how to fight." The pressure was mounting for her to fight back. The minority leader called again. "You have to hit back, Jasmine. Go on TV and call him a liar. My pollsters say if you don't respond, it looks like you have something to hide." Some of the more progressive members of her caucus wanted her to use the attacks to rally the base. to go on the offensive. She sat in her office late one night, the city lights twinkling below, and considered her options. She could go on television and painstakingly debunk each lie, but she knew it was a trap. The camera would show her defending herself, looking weak and reactive. She would be playing his game on his turf. Or she could do nothing and risk letting the poison seep into the public consciousness. She thought about his strategy, to create chaos, to exhaust, to disgust. She thought about her own strategy, to bring clarity, to focus on principle, to refuse the performance. He wanted a fight. He wanted a reaction. The most powerful thing she could do, she realized, was to deny him one. She would not let him set the terms of engagement. She had already defined the battlefield at Howard University. She just needed to remind everyone where it was. She pulled out her personal laptop, opened a blank document, and began to type. There was no staff review, no polling analysis. It was just her. An hour later, she posted the statement directly to her social media accounts. It was short, just 5 sentences. When people cannot defeat your ideas, they will try to destroy your character. This is the oldest play in the Book of Power without principle. They are dredging for mud because they have no foundation to stand on. I will not be distracted by this, and you should not be either. The issue was never my character. It has always been the character of our nation. I said everything that needed to be said at Howard University. That is where I stand. That was it. No defense, no denial, no anger. Just a calm, clear refusal to participate. She turned off her computer, walked past her security detail, and for the first time in weeks, slept through the night. The effect of her statement was profound. It didn't stop the smear machine, but it rendered it impotent. By refusing to engage with the specifics, she framed the entire campaign as a desperate tactic, a confession of his intellectual and moral bankruptcy. Her supporters shared the statement by the hundreds of thousands. Even some neutral journalists began to frame their stories differently, reporting on the smear campaign not as a series of allegations to be investigated, but as a political strategy. In itself, she had refused to be dragged into the mud, and in doing so, had kept herself and her argument clean. The national story began to fade, not because the fight was over, but because she had refused to keep fighting on his terms. But the real impact, the lasting echo of her stand, wasn't measured in headlines or poll numbers. It was measured in quiet moments, in rooms far from Washington, D.C., where the cameras were never rolling. 3 weeks later, in a stuffy, overcrowded courtroom in San Antonio, a young public defender named Maya Reyes stood before the bench. She was 28, buried in student debt, and running on fumes. Her client was a 19-year-old kid accused of a low-level drug offense, and the prosecutor was pushing for the maximum sentence. The judge was a notoriously impatient man who had a habit of making his disdain for public defenders clear. Maya was trying to argue a motion to suppress evidence based on a faulty search warrant, her argument dense with case law and procedural detail. The judge kept cutting her off. "Ms. Reyes, get to the point," he sighed, tapping his pen on his desk. "We don't have all day for your academic theories, Your Honor," Maya persisted. "The precedent set in Texas v. Johnson is clear on this matter. The affidavit for the warrant failed to establish probable cause." The prosecutor, a portly man with a smug smile, scoffed audibly. "Objection, Your Honor. The defense is just trying to find a loophole for her guilty client." "Counselor," the judge said, looking down at Maya with open condescension, "you're getting a little emotional about this. It's a simple possession case. Let's move it along." Emotional. The word hit Maya like a slap. She felt a hot flash of anger and humiliation. She saw the smirk on the prosecutor's face. She felt the familiar urge to shrink, to apologize, to just say, "Never mind, Your Honor," and sit down. Her mind raced. She thought about her client, who was looking at her with desperate eyes. She thought about quitting, about finding a job where she wasn't treated like a disobedient child for simply doing her job. And then, for some reason, the image of Jasmine Crockett popped into her head. She had watched the hearing on her lunch break, glued to her phone. She had watched the Howard speech twice. She remembered the insult, "little girl." She remembered the calm, clear response. She remembered the line about refusing to stay in rooms that asked you to leave parts of yourself at the door. Maya took a slow, deep breath, just as she'd seen Crockett do. She straightened her shoulders. She looked the judge directly in the eye, her voice suddenly devoid of any tremor. "Your Honor," she said, her tone respectful but firm, "I am not being emotional, I am being precise. And the precision of the Fourth Amendment is the only thing protecting every citizen in this city from unlawful searches. My clients, guilt or innocence is not the issue before us. The issue is the legality of the state's conduct, and the conduct, as established by the evidence, was unlawful. Therefore, the motion to suppress must be granted." She didn't shout, she didn't plead, she simply stood on the truth of the law. Just as Crockett had stood on the truth of the document, the judge stared at her, surprised by her sudden shift in demeanor. The prosecutor's smirk faded. The judge, after a long moment, grumbled, "Take your motion under advisement." It wasn't a dramatic, movie-ending victory. But as Maya Reyes walked back to her table, she didn't feel small, she felt steady. She hadn't won the motion, not yet, but she had held her ground. She had refused to be dismissed in that small, forgotten courtroom. She had found her voice by borrowing someone else's courage. That was Jasmine Crockett's real victory. It wasn't the viral clips or the fawning headlines. It wasn't in the failure of the censure motion or the fizzling of the smear campaign. It was in the quiet, unseen transfer of strength. It was in the thousands of young women and men who watched her and learned not how to shout, but how to stand. She had faced down a bully on the world's biggest stage, not for the sake of her own career, but for the sake of the principle. And the echo of that stand was now giving backbone to people in courtrooms, classrooms, and boardrooms across the country. Proving that true leadership isn't just about winning a fight, but about teaching others how to find the strength to enter their own. Jasmine Crockett proved that one person's voice can change the conversation. But what happens when the system itself refuses to listen? Subscribe for more real stories about real people standing tall in the spaces that try to shrink them.